Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. From 2015 to 2017, the horror franchise we focused on in October was A Nightmare on Elm Street. And by now, if you don't know who Freddy Krueger is, I don't know how to help you. As I said in those previous years, the only remaining Nightmare on Elm Street comics to look at are either really good, or I've already summarized what happened in them, so let's take a look at a bad follow-up to a good comic that we covered last year. Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash was the proposed sequel to Freddy vs. Jason that sadly never got off the ground in the film world. And while the three-way crossover was not perfect, it was very enjoyable and would have made for a fun film had it ever gotten made. And because of its own success as a comic, naturally a sequel was called for. The original had just taken the script they had written and transposed it into comic form, but this one would be written for comics, meaning no concern about budget or available actors or anything like that. Forgetting, of course, that bigger is not always better, and sometimes a limited budget can keep your focus tightened. It's like throwing dozens of things into a blender. Just because individually they're good doesn't mean the mush you've made will actually be delicious. I have heard from some people that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes tumult with it, that the original story was expected to not do well, so the various companies behind the characters, either comics or movie studios, didn't really interfere with it, but when it ended up doing well, they of course decided to step in and fix things until it broke. On top of that, apparently it was supposed to be a 12-issue maxi series, and ended up condensing the entire story they planned for that into 6. That I can really believe. But we've got a lot of comic to get through, so let's just get you all up to speed, shall we? Sometime after the events of Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy wakes Jason up again so he can claim the Necronomicon and all its evil, mystical powers. Ash Williams, on the hunt for the book, comes to Crystal Lake searching for it while working at the Crystal Lake S-Mart, dealing with its parade of teenagers whom I'm sure led very interesting, rich lives that we never get to see because they were annoying, horny idiots. Freddy eventually got his claws on the Necronomicon and summoned all manner of hellish fun, but Jason turned on him, and the three horror icons proceeded to shoot and stab each other until finally Freddy is sent into a Deadite realm. Jason fell into the ice and stopped fighting, with the implication that you could pacify Jason Voorhees with just a cold shower, and Ash rode off into the sunset with a girl named Carrie, who I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a teenager too, but I don't really care to look into it that much. So let's dig into Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, the Nightmare Warriors, and see if they topped the first miniseries. Or if they even should have tried to.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. Brodsky, you're not the smartest. Life out, you're not an artist. Anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he's a man punch, wears a birdie hat. Linkara, he has a magic gun. Where'd he purchase that? Linkara, coins, robots, Amazons and trucks. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
Almighty's back. He's the man behind the mask, and he's out of control. He's back.
6-issue miniseries, and let's face it, fans of these characters would have bought this thing regardless of the covers, so let's skip it. We open 24 hours after the events of the first miniseries in Crystal Lake, where Jason is still resting in the ice, though you wouldn't know it since his face is currently locked in an eternal screaming pose. Or maybe he's just yawning because Freddy woke him up. As with before, he has taken on the visage of his mother and is ordering him to hunt down and kill Ash, giving a not very detailed recap of the events of the mini, but making sure to make everyone's torsos really long for some reason.
Introducing Johnny Long Torso.
Also, to let us know that Carrie has nipples and a thong in her low-riding jeans, because that was essential. But how can Jason possibly find him? Look deep in your rotted heart, Jason. You can find him just like you found all the irresponsible degenerates that tried to hide from you. So Jason actually does have a horny teenager sense? He is a compass for slasher movie victims? While that's going on under the ice, above it, a group of government vehicles surround the lake. The guy in charge, Director Russell, orders them to locate the Necronomicon, which is conveniently laying on top of the ice. One of his officers is wondering why they care about the book. Shouldn't Voorhees be our main target here? The military applications of an unkillable soldier seem a lot more plausible than some book of witchcraft. Truly, plausibility is the thing that should be questioned in your current situation, involving a nigh-immortal zombie who fought against a resurrected child killer, who both in turn had a confrontation with a chosen one who replaced his hand with a chainsaw to fight demons. Russell says that the guy's thinking too small. Voorhees is just a big dumb animal, whereas the Book of the Dead contains much more power. What's funny is that the government will eventually agree with the other guy. Jason X showed us that in the far-off future of 2010, the government would indeed want to try to study Jason and the potential for super soldiers using him. Also, David Cronenberg was in charge of that research for some reason. Anyway, they retrieve the book, encased in ice, and free it from said ice, handing it over to Russell, while also giving him a blanket out of nowhere. Look, the guy's playing with dark powers that open portals to other realms full of hellish monstrosities. We don't want him to catch a cold. I can't believe it. It's been such a long time coming. I'm finally holding it. This is the key to Project Black Book. Your bookstore will be mine, Bernard. It will be mine. They are after Jason too, but he's a secondary objective, specifically for Project Slapshot. Ah yes, the government's plan to create a horror-themed hockey team. Jason is the linchpin in all of this! This naturally does not go well, with Jason easily slaughtering the two divers who went after him, and the remaining troops above the water unable to put him down despite pumping enough bullets at him that just standing near the dude would give you lead poisoning. Even electrical prods, which look suspiciously like toy rockets, aren't enough. The electrocution barely phases him. He's yanking out the prods! Quick, gentlemen, to the hobby store! After Jason uses the prods to electrocute them, the remaining men say screw it and just try to attack him with knives. It's about as effective as everything else they try. After Jason got gunned down by the FBI in Part 9, he finally realized his mistake. Attack the people shooting at you and you'll survive! Conveniently, his half-destroyed hockey mask is nearby, so he reclaims it and goes off on his merry way to murder Ash. We cut to 6 months later in Franklin, Michigan, where Ash is living with Carrie and barbecuing. Since then, I've traded my chainsaw for a spatula, my boomstick for a gas grill, and the jalopy for a comfy couch. I actually still fight deadites. Spatulas are surprisingly effective weapons against them. They have a guest at the door, Maggie Burroughs, aka the main character of Nightmare on Elm Street 6. And if you'll recall, Freddy Krueger's daughter. I've been working with noted psychiatrist Dr. Neil Gordon on a project that could save literally millions of lives. We believe that there is a special group of people, focal magnets for the supernatural, that will allow us to combat the unnatural evils in the world. Look, I already told that other guy I'm not interested in the Avengers Initiative. Well, that's basically what he says. He's not interested in joining up, but Maggie warns him that the dark forces they're worrying about will eventually find him. Ash goes out to get more beer and wine for the pool party, which just makes me realize, where the hell is Ash working now where he can afford a really nice house and a friggin' pool? Or does S-Mart really care about its housewares department? Jason breaks into Ash's house, and I've got to admit, his look here is legitimately creepy. It was said that they blew off the bottom of his mask like they did to give Jason a more Grim Reaper-like visage while retaining the overall design, as we see here with the very skeletal mouth as the burned remains of the hockey mask cover the rest of his face. I like it. I would have loved to see this in an actual Friday the 13th movie. While Carrie tries to fight Jason off, Ash spots a man who looks like Freddy in a parking lot and races back home, realizing what his presence could mean. And he does so while listening to He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask by Alice Cooper, aka the theme song for Friday the 13th Part 6. And that's the last Easter egg I'll mention, aside from some plot-relevant stuff later. See, this thing is loaded with references like that, and this episode is going to be long enough as it is. Back at the Pentagon, Russell has apparently spent 6 months trying to convince his assistant, Agent Carter, that playing around with the Necronomicon is a good idea, because he's still doing it even after he already justified it when they first picked it up. Russell explains how useful it'll be to have these sorts of powers. Assassination, covert intelligence, that sort of thing. My God, Carter, can you imagine the possibilities once we bring Krueger into the program? But isn't he a psychopath and a mass murderer? Carter, you realize you work for the US government, right? Issue 1 ends with Ash arriving home only to find Carrie decapitated and her head in the grill. The other guests arriving right afterwards, including Carrie's father, who accuses Ash of doing this. Issue 2 begins with Ash fleeing the scene and protesting his innocence. Apparently the guests must have called the cops since they're on the way right as he's heading out, just barely having time to grab his chainsaw and shotgun. Someone observes all this from a Humvee, noting that Ash seems familiar. Back over to the Pentagon, we see that Russell is apparently also in charge of the friggin' Stargate program, given that object in the background there. They use some kind of laser on the Necronomicon, which translates and broadcasts the words in the page. The book tells of an eternal evil that controls the waking and dreaming landscapes. We are going to harness that unlimited power. You know, I'm going to be making plenty of jokes at the expense of the government in this review, but it really is peak government to look at a force that even they describe as evil and saying, "Cool, how can we exploit it?" Soon this nation will stand alone, unchallengeable and undefeatable. No force on earth will stand in our way. Always a good sign that you're doing the right thing when you're ranting like a supervillain. The machine finishes its job, summoning a very naked and a very much alive Freddy Krueger. Mr. Krueger, we have a lot of questions for you. Although I can see one question answered right away, the glove is to compensate for something. We cut over to Maggie and that face. Yeah, I've been kinda hinting at it, but the artwork on this thing is rushed. Really rushed. Proportions are off in a lot of spots, there are some bizarre facial expressions at a few points, and likely because of likeness rights issues, most of the characters will only just barely resemble the people they're supposed to. Characters, you ask? Why, yes. See, it's time for us to learn why this comic is called The Nightmare Warriors. Namely because it unites the remaining survivors of the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street franchises. Maggie we've already seen here, and she's in bed with Dr. Neil Gordon from Nightmare 3, which is really kind of weird since he was kind of in a relationship with Nancy, giving the impression he's just latching on to any of the protagonists of the series. The door to their room is knocked on, and enter these two Barbie dolls. I mean Rennie and Tina. Rennie is from Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes a Boat to Manhattan, while Tina is a telekinetic girl from Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Yeah, I'm not kidding about the artwork doing them no favors. Ignoring even the generic body types and skimpy outfits for the two, the hair color is basically the only way to tell they are who they're supposed to be. And even that's a bit of a stretch, since I never really thought of Rennie as a redhead. And then the two climb into bed with them? Maggie holds Rennie, who is now pantsless for some reason, like she was a little girl and not, you know, a full-grown adult. Seriously, she was graduating high school in her movie, and even giving the benefit of the doubt to these movies not taking place in the year they were released, especially since some of the movies all take place on the same weekend, the amount of time that must have passed between films should make her at least another decade older. Anyway, Rennie says she senses something really bad coming, and Maggie squeezes her fingers really hard for no reason. Well, there is a reason, but no reason to do it now, and no reason why Rennie isn't questioning her about it. Why don't you and Tina go downstairs while I get dressed? I'm so fascinated about how your empathy can affect perception. You really have a unique gift. And that is more explanation of why Rennie saw visions of child Jason in Jason Takes Manhattan than the movie itself ever gave. Ash takes a train to Baltimore to meet with Maggie, although considering she had just met him earlier that day, not sure why she was just waking up in Baltimore. Or is this supposed to be a different day altogether? Because it seems like Ash took his sweet time deciding to do this, if that's the case.
Space is warped and time is bendable.
And apparently Jason is outside that same train, given that reflection in the glass, but then we see him stow away on a completely different kind of train on the next page. Or maybe Jason just finally retired and decided to police trespassers on trains like these two guys. Back over to the survivors, Neil thinks that this entire plan of uniting the survivors is a bad idea. It's too similar to the group we had in Springwood, and the results there were catastrophic. Because they were already targeted by Freddy. Uniting them was the only thing that actually helped you beat him in that movie. What the hell? Maggie thinks that bringing them all together will help identify a common trait that can be used to stop beings like Freddy and Jason. You say that, but Laurie Strode survived Michael Myers multiple times, and all that ended up doing was shattering the space-time continuum so that now there are like 4 timelines! Besides, it'll make one hell of a paper. Good enough to get you reinstated. So I wrote this paper about how people who survived attacks by 2 undead serial killers totally have some unique trait about them that makes them special, as opposed to just being incredibly lucky and determined individuals. Can I have my doctorate back? 2 new people arrive, both from Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Main character Stephen Freeman and his daughter Stephanie, who was a baby in that movie. But she somehow knows who Jason is and can remember him. They mention that the other survivor, Jessica Kimball, aka Jason's niece, is now dead. Stephanie is actually a pretty good example of how clearly a lot of time has passed, since of course baby in her movie, and the implication is that she's a preteen. Not that the artwork would show it, because the artist just draws her like the other 2 girls, basically a tinier adult in skimpy clothing. She suddenly has a seizure and visions of a woman almost getting gang raped right outside of the train Jason was on. Like in broad daylight right outside the friggin' train. And this comic, classy as it is, has Jason not only murder the 3 would-be rapists, but also their would-be victim. Yeah, that's the thing. Even without editorial interference, this comic is not exactly endearing itself to me. Sure, innocent people die in slasher movies, but it's really kind of a dick move narratively to do it to someone who is about to be victimized in a completely different horrible way. Let's not forget killing off Carrie. Sure, she wasn't exactly a rich character in the first story, but this basically fridges her to give Ash new motivation, and I suspect they killed Jessica off-panel because they couldn't give her a different enough hair color to make her look distinct from the other survivors. Back at the Pentagon, Russell and Carter are interviewing Krueger, wondering how a small-time child murderer could invade people's dreams. How did you do it? Was it the book that gave you the power? The book? What, like the Bible or something? You gotta be kidding me. And lo, Jeremiah said to the doomed city of Jerusalem, "Welcome to prime time, bitch." Back at the house, Stephanie recovers none the worse for wear, with Maggie saying that this is necessary for all the survivors to learn their gifts. At the same time, 2 more survivors arrive, the Dream Master Alice and her now-born son Jacob. Hopefully, he will be less creepy and robotic than he was in that Nightmares on Elm Street comic I reviewed in 2015. At the Pentagon, Freddy agrees to show Russell how to use the Necronomicon to master the power of dreams, while Carter reports that Jason has been spotted in Maryland. Russell orders that Jason be brought in alive. Forgo regular weapons and just pump enough tranquilizers in him to keep him subdued. Use enough to drop a whale if you have to, but do not let your team screw it up again. Your team really screwed up, what with how they were all slaughtered horribly despite unleashing everything they could except orbital bombardment on him. Ash arrives at the house, naturally pissed about everything that's gone down, even thinking Maggie knew this would happen specifically. With him there, she reveals that this isn't just about therapy, but rather uniting all their abilities to put a stop to Jason and Freddy once and for all. This upsets Steven, who just wanted to put this whole thing behind him, but his ranting is interrupted. And Steven is murdered in one hit. And now both remaining characters from Jason Goes to Hell are dead. And look, I know that one's not exactly anyone's favorite, but it's still kinda disrespectful to the characters and the journey they went through to have that happen like that. One dead off panel, the other judo chopped by Jason so that it crushes his head, and we're left with their daughter, who's basically a blank slate because we haven't established any real characterization for her yet. I was gonna question why Jesse Walsh wasn't in this, but maybe I should be happy he isn't, since apparently the comic isn't interested in keeping around anybody from the lesser-liked sequels. The Humvee from earlier smashes into the wall and knocks Jason away, the driver instructing the survivors to load up and get out of there. Issue 2 ends revealing that he's Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th, 4, 5, and 6. Tommy Jarvis, neat kid into monster movies, and now paramilitary nut obsessed with Jason. So glad he got a happy ending in part 6. Issue 3 begins with a different sort of art fail. The government forces arrive at Maggie's house to take Jason, but all their speech balloons are coming from Tommy's Humvee. Whoops. Anyway, they do a much better job of capturing Jason. Tons of tranquilizers and knockout gas that take him down. Meanwhile, our heroes have retreated to a motel. And I know I wasn't going to mention more Easter eggs, but I love multi-level jokes. It's the Stabe Motel, with the E blacked out to make it Stab. Cute enough, but it's also an anagram of Bates Motel, and there's even kind of a Bates house in the background. So yeah, very cute. I like it. Anyway, Tommy says that only he can take down Jason, and they should leave him to do it. You know, like how he ran away at the end of the last issue when he finally found Jason. Maggie says that no one person can take them down permanently. It needs to happen as a group. Look, lady, I've seen Jason wipe out entire communities. When? The closest that happened was in part 5, but that wasn't Jason. One of the things the creators wanted to do in the story is put two alpha male personalities against each other, in this case Ash and Tommy. Although I would have never described Tommy Jarvis as an alpha male, nor this lone wolf thing. In the 6th movie, he was running around trying to convince people Jason was back because he was trying to warn them and get help. I faced him and stopped him. Yeah, you've done a great job of that so far, fancy pants. I'm calling you that despite the fact that you're not a nobleman listing off his titles and have exhibited no qualities of being fancy. But hey, remember when I called a guy that in Army of Darkness? Boy howdy, this isn't badly written. Maggie tells them both to knock it off and reiterates what she said a million times by now, that there's something special about all the survivors that helped them slow down Freddy or Jason, which totally saved Steven back at the house. Rennie here is an empath. She can feel the emotions of those around her, and they make her stronger. She survived Jason's murderous rampage because she could feel the pain driving him. She survived because New York inexplicably dumps toxic waste in its sewers every day at midnight. Her purported empathic abilities have been less useful than Counselor Troy's. Each of the group recounts their relation to Freddy or Jason, with the artists already beginning to get confused about which character is which. Alice is now dressed like Rennie was earlier, and is now inexplicably a redhead too. But whatever. After some bickering between Ash and Tommy, Maggie says that the Necronomicon is the key to killing Freddy and Jason, claiming that her father is in charge of the government agency that recovered the book. They need to go there to use it to end things. Jason is brought to said facility too, where apparently the government has been busy summoning Deadites and putting them in a holding facility. Yeah, issue 3 is really where the pacing issues with this book become evident, because there's like 3 or 4 issues worth of content crammed in here. Like, in this short amount of time, they've already built a Deadite holding facility and have been summoning them en masse? Why even summon Deadites? Sure, Russell mentioned the idea of having an army of undead servants, but you'd think they'd start small and work their way up. The dream assassination thing before that. Also, Freddy is here and back in his normal form. Yeah, we'll see later that his living look is a trick, but of course it's spoiled right here by just having him like this and in the Deadite pen. Welcome to the pit, Jason! It seems another clueless Washington egghead thought he could use the Necronomicon to gain ultimate power. Another one? There was a government stooge who tried to do this before?
I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works.
Oh, and while the majority of the artwork is bad, like in this shot where Freddy brings Jason into a void and he has become Johnny Long Torso and has stubby legs, the next panel is a straight up lift from a shot in Freddy vs. Jason, and as a result looks a lot better than most of the book. It's really depressing when the best examples of artwork in this thing are when they trace stuff. Freddy rambles to Jason about his plan to expand his murder operations to the entire world, not just in small cities and to children anymore. Hey, I got an idea. Let's take this series about a revenge-seeking ghost demon who haunts your nightmares and just turn him into a straight-up cartoon supervillain. That doesn't seem dumb and unnecessary at all. Escalation is certainly a thing when it comes to sequels, but this is just goofy. One of the things that makes Freddy vs. Jason work is a simple line of dialogue. We're not safe awake or asleep. You can't escape Freddy by being awake because you've got a hulking, unstoppable force hunting you during that time. When you boil them down, slasher movies are just about people trying to overcome a monster, be they mortal or supernatural. They're small scale, yes, limited to usually just a few people, but the stakes are just as high because it's life or death. Was anyone asking for Freddy Krueger to try to take over the world or some crap like that? Jason breaks free of his restraints and attacks Freddy, who gets him to stop by mentioning that all the people who survived his rampage are coming back. You remember them, don't you, Jason? Tina, Stephanie, Ash, and Tommy. Yes, upon hearing Tommy Jarvis's name, Jason lets Freddy go. Does Jason even know who half the survivors of his movies are? How is Tommy any different to him than Guinea from Part 2? Holy crap, Guinea isn't in this either! And we never did find out if Paul is still alive! Why does this comic hate the people from Part 2 of both franchises?
So what'll it be, Jason? Will you keep trying to kill me? A misunderstood friend who only ever wanted to help you? Or will you agree to be my agent? My sword? My black plague? What'll it be, Jason? Instead of being a villain on equal par with me, you'll just be my lackey in this comic!
Before anyone says anything, yeah, he was working for him in Freddy vs. Jason, but that was Freddy tricking him because the only person Jason ever listened to was his mother, and it was to get the plot going. This is just annoying because it makes him into a pawn who can be reasoned with. One thing that is kinda neat, though, is the acknowledgement that Jason is barely being held together now. All the damage he's accrued over the series is catching up to him, so Freddy hits the reset button, restoring his body, his mask, and his hair, too. Anyway, our heroes arrive in DC and enter the facility, Neil mentioning to Ash that he doesn't really know anything about Maggie's father. She only started mentioning him recently and had assumed he was dead. Of course, once they go in, Maggie introduces herself to Russell and says they have information about Krueger's part in all this, demanding that Neil and Rennie go in with her to see him. Once in their cells, Ash wonders why Maggie had to introduce herself to Russell if her father was the one in charge of Operation Black Book. Russell brings the three to Krueger, who transforms back into his normal form. This joke doesn't really work as well when I don't have a physical copy of the comic with me. I couldn't find it. Freddy explains that he spent so much time with the Necronomicon that he's basically merged with it now. Russell, though, thinks he can still stop him.
I have the glove. It was the source of your power.
Okay, 1, were you just carrying that thing around with you under your arm for 6 months? 2, where the hell did you get the idea that his glove was the source of his power?
Hey, you forgot the power glove.
Fair enough. Maggie, however, suddenly intercedes and turns the glove around, stabbing Russell with it. Neil is shocked and confused, but Rennie has already figured it out. Maggie is actually on Freddy's side. Yes, the protagonist of the 6th movie, Freddy's daughter, who defeated him before and hated him and managed to overcome him, is in fact now evil with no explanation about why that is. Oh, but it gets better, because she happily lets Freddy feel her up, because now they're in an incestuous relationship too! And enjoy the sexy, sexy incest with Maggie's now exposed boobs, readers! It's probably the biggest middle finger to the fans they could have done. Only worse would have been if, like, Nancy was alive and had been the one to betray them. It's a twist that may have been foreshadowed in a few spots within the story, but it makes absolutely no sense otherwise. And like with the other characters who have been killed so far, Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare might not have been a very good movie, but it still was a part of the franchise, and this is even worse than killing off those other survivors. At least you could argue, well, it's a slasher story. It's not always going to be a happy ending for the survivors in a sequel. But this? This is an asshole move that's completely unnecessary for the story and betrays Maggie's character. This right here is worse than anything else in this comic, because it really, really does show how much this book does not understand the thing that it kept endlessly repeating to us. The power of the survivors. Uniting these survivors together is such a cool concept because they were all great characters. The movies did such a great job having us invest in them, made us care about what happened to them, and wanting to see them win through. The reason we like the survivors of these slasher franchises is because of their characterization, the arcs they had to go through, and adversities they had to overcome. Alice isn't interesting because she has dream powers. She's interesting because in the wake of overwhelming tragedy, losing friends and loved ones, and even potentially her unborn child, she fought back against Freddy and people who doubted her and won through. Tommy isn't some badass because he took on Jason more than once. It's because he went through a horribly traumatic traumatic incident as a child, experienced terrible personal hardship as a result of it, and eventually came back to bury the bad things that happened to him. One of the writers, Jeff Katz, said that if Ash is Superman, then the Nightmare Warriors are his Justice League. I get what he was trying to say with that statement, but it's the completely wrong analogy. They're not the Justice League. They're the Guardians of the Galaxy. They're a group of people united in common cause by friendship and family while dealing with the traumas they've experienced. Or at least that's how it should be. Instead, they're just cannon fodder. Maggie, or Catherine as she now calls herself, kills Neil and Rennie. Just 2 more victims for the body count, no more important than any of the soldiers who died trying to capture Jason. Freddy reveals her true appearance, which is just sexy, skimpy clothing while wearing razor blade claws. Thanks for that, Nightmare Warriors. It's truly what the fans wanted. Back in the cell, Tina senses Rennie's death thanks to Rennie's empathic powers broadcasting them to her, revealing also the truth about Maggie. Using Tina's telekinetic powers, they escape, but they're not the only ones. The Deadites, led by Jason, storm through their cell doors to start their own rampage, ending issue 3. Issue 4 begins with a Deadite encountering Ash.
Here! The Chosen One is here!
Yeah, I'm here all right, and so is my fist.
You know, you got a lot of mouth, and I got a lot of fists for your mouth.
Holy crap, now there's a team up I'd want to see. Ash and Mr. T versus Freddy and Jason.